Okay, something on death from a chaos shamanic point of view. I'm inventing this as I go along, which is great. I love to do that. And I think with chaos shamanism, you believe what you want, you use what stories that you want. The point is to be open and to be flexible. It's not confining you to a particular position, although it is quite demanding. It demands chaos shamanism demands that we remain true to ourselves. We remain honest with ourselves as much as we can. Of course, we'll fail sometimes. So it's quite demanding in that sense, but it's not demanding in the sense that you need to believe this or you need to believe that or do this practice or do that ceremony and do it the right way and not the wrong way. It's outside of all that because it's getting to the heart of these things. It's getting to the heart of that spirit that's in us that is here for some kind of unfoldment, some kind of pattern, something it has to do. Um, you know, that we probably need to look back on to see what it was, but we get hints of it as life goes on and we see what kind of comes our way and what we unfold into. And so this open attitude of openness, it needs to apply to the subject of death because we don't know. I read an account um, of a shamanic tribe in the far east of Russia. I can't remember what the book's called now, but it was a long account, and I've had a very detailed um, story about what happens after you die. You know, about how you meet your relatives in this place, and this is what you do, etc., etc. Um, Another native guy I talked to, I go, well, what happens after you die? What do you believe your people believe? He goes, well, we just don't know. We have no view. So there you go. There's two different views. I must say, I thought the former view was a bit, it did seem to me like a belief that they thought, well, that's actually how it is. That's how it was written in the book, at any rate. And of course, no story about what happens after we die is actually how it is. Um, it's the place where we go beyond all stories, because all stories happen within time and space necessarily. And time and space are not attributes of the universe, we put them onto it. So we need this unknowing. I mean, we need an unknowing around our own lives, and then we need an unknowing about what happens after it. And that's difficult. That's difficult for most people. It's difficult for all of us. Um, it's just a matter of the degree to which you can be flexible around that, the degree to which you treat your stories as real and to which you kind of relativize them. And that's an emotional thing. You just tune in and see how you're doing on that one. How literally do you take the Big Bang, for example, one of our creation myths? Well, we can't help but take it literally to some extent because it's drummed into us as what actually happened with all sorts of equations that none of us will ever understand to back it up. And it's got that kind of weight of authority behind it. And when something has authority behind it, somewhere we can't help but believe it, even if rationally we go, well, no, it is just a story. No one was actually there. No one took a picture of the bloody thing, you know. Um, and so we need to keep being honest about our unknowingness. Yeah. Are we actually being unknowing emotionally, or is it just an intellectual position? This is quite an interesting area. I've only just thought of it, really, as I talk about it. And it applies to the death thing. And if you're going to have stories about what happens after death, then why not? I suggest have more than one. That's always a good idea because then it's harder to get literal about either. So you might on the one hand think, well, actually, I really don't know. But actually, I quite like what the Tibetan Book of the Dead says. I also quite like what that ancient tribe in Siberia says about, meeting all your rallies and all the rest of it. But all we can really do is sit in that unknowing. And now that's a positive thing. That's a positive, sitting in that unknowing. And life trains us to do that. Life trains us to trust what is coming next, even though we can't know what's coming next. We go through these big changes in life and we don't know what's going to come out the other side. But actually, we find if we're honest, if we're true to ourselves, it comes out in a good way. And gradually, we learn to let go of all those plans and all those desires for particular outcomes. We learn to let go of that and sit with where the Spirit wants to take us and trust in that. And in that way, life is a preparation for death. If you go through a change in life, well, you have some kind of idea what's coming next. Unless you're going to die, you're going to have 2 arms and 2 legs, and you'll still be good at what you're good at, etc., etc. So it's not a complete unknowing, but with death, it is a complete unknowing. But it's as if those changes in life are training us. It's like we need death as an end point. So it gives us something real to practice towards, to practice the unknowing. So life as a preparation for death, in the sense of life as learning to trust what is ever coming next. That life takes care of us. Life's looking after us. Life's on our side. So in a fundamental sense, obviously things will go wrong. Obviously there'll be difficulties, but we need to come to feel that life's on our side. Of course, we don't necessarily feel that to start with. We might really feel life is against us. We've got our back up against the wall. A lot of people feel like that. And maybe terrible things did happen to you in your childhood. Maybe they are an explanation for it. Or maybe you brought those demons in anyway. Who knows? Yeah. Of course, we need to be sympathetic to how we feel, but have some distance, have some perspective, and come to feel eventually that life is with us. And sometimes those struggles, come to feel that, are the making of us. I had a dream a few years ago now in which I was looking from the side of death, and it's like I was in the death place, and it was like one of those airports with thousands of people arriving, or beings arriving every second, and death was just completely normal, almost banal. It was something you didn't even pay attention to because it was just happening all the time. So death is just completely normal. It's more normal, if you like, to be dead than alive. This life, it's just a temporary dream, a bubble that bursts. I mean, it's really important, I think, to stay here and do the things we're here to do, but it is ultimately, it's a dream, surrounded by a mystery. Francis Bacon, the philosopher, said, it is as natural to die as to be born. And that gives that same kind of perspective. It's just something normal. It's just what happens. But we've got a history with death in the West. I read a book called Western Attitudes to Death by Philip Ariès, a French academic. It's just a short book, 4 lectures. And he points out how our attitude to death has changed over the last 1,000 years. To start with, early Middle Ages, death was treated as something, it was just normal. And if you thought you were going to die, you announced it to the rest of the family, took to your bed, and they did whatever ceremonies they did around it. But it was you that announced it. And you can see how we've got the opposite these days. It's like, shall I tell him, and all the rest of it. And, let's talk about in jolly terms that he's going to get better. Um, and then after the early Middle Ages, it became more of a reckoning. When you died, it was a reckoning with your maker, and you had to account for yourself. You're going to be sent to heaven or sent to hell. So it became much more loaded and weighty. Dr. Johnson, who created the first dictionary, he was terrified of death because he knew he was a very talented guy and he didn't feel he fully used his talents, even though he did a lot, and that therefore he'd go to hell. So even an intelligent, sensitive, imaginative guy like that was terrified of death. And then you get the modern position where, well, death is seen as an extinction. You even get psychoanalysts, psychotherapists like Irvin Yalom, very well known, respected guy. He's an existential psychotherapist. And he says that any attitude towards death that his patients have other than an extinction is a false comfort. And he sees his job as a fantasy. And he sees his job as bringing them round for that and from that and getting them to accept the reality, which is extinction. It's just nothing. Of course, we do this shamanic thing. Everything is alive. It's not a separate quality. You don't have fire, water, air, earth, and spirit. They are all inspirited. It's part of everything. And when fire, water, earth, and air dissolve, well, what happens to spirit? Why should it just go? Fire, earth, air, and water haven't gone. They've just reconstituted themselves. Why shouldn't spirit reconstitute itself in whatever form? A view I like of what happens after death is that we become everything. Why wouldn't we? So what do we do about old age? That's connected. I'm 66 now, and I was dreading turning 60 because it's old, and the cultural attitude is that it's gently downhill from there on in. You're gradually getting iller and iller with less and less energy, and then you die. And that hasn't been my experience at all. My experience has been one of renewal. When I was 61, I've been having dreams for some years about a woman I'd forgotten about. And then, as a sort of psychic reality, not as a literal reality in the world. And at one point, after I'd been in 2 sweat lodges in one weekend, it was as if she descended into me. And she's like the creative force. She's like the soul. And I started teaching again quite soon after that, and then writing books. It's like she's enabled me to do that. So there's been this deep renewal, this deep abundance. Inwardly, I feel younger and fresher and more enthusiastic about life than ever. Certainly more than 40 years ago, when life just seemed like this huge cliff that was against me that I had to climb up, even though I had this metaphysical quest. So I think life can become more abundant, not less abundant. Jung, the psychotherapist, or psychoanalyst, there's a interview with him on YouTube from like 1959. Look up the Young Freeman interview. The BBC did it. The guy John Freeman went out there, very English guy, Yeah, it's all in black and white, and it's charming, really. But Young, he's 81 at this point. He's just so at ease with who he is, and he's a delight just to be around. And he's asked, well, what happens after you die? And he goes, well, I don't know. We don't know. He goes, but um, the dreams of my elderly patients don't point to an extinction. They just point to life going on. They're not seeing, the dreams aren't pointing to an ending. They're just pointing to life continuing on. And so he said, that's how nature sees it. And he says it's always the right way to live is according to nature. That doesn't make nature right or wrong, but we are in balance. We're living correctly if we live according to how the nature in us and around us lives. And it doesn't have this big fear of death as this sort of extinction. It just sees, well, the life force, whatever that is, it just continues. So I thought that's a really good point, and it takes all the theorizing out of it, you see, because you just live according to nature. So that was very good. Right, I've just had a message on Facebook which has just distracted me for a bit, but I'll I'll work out what my theme is if I just leave it a few seconds. I just trust it. That's the thing. You just got to trust when you do these things and you're doing these spontaneous talks that you'll find what you're talking about. So I'm talking about death and just that kind of trust in it that Jung came forward with. And so as we get older, we get closer to death. It becomes more of a reality for us. I've had it coming closer to me through family members. That seems to be what does it for me, at any rate, is family members. Even though I'm not particularly close to them in many ways, because I've got very different values. I live quite a different life, but they're still connected to you at a visceral level. And when they go, it's like death moves a bit closer. And it's like at the moment, I'm looking out over this open water, this sound. Yeah, and it's mine to swim in. It's where I'm heading out. And it's broad enough, but in the distance, there's these mountains, and that's death. I can just about make out the mountains. And so I will be going there. And that'll be the next adventure. It's mountains, which are an adventurous place to go. So I will be going there. And I can see it. But I have some swimming to do first. And it's great. It's almost like a sort of vision in front of me of how things are. And, when something is a bit visionary or intuitive like that, you don't have a time scale around it because it's outside of time and space. It's just like, look, here's the situation. Yeah, here's the pattern that you're living through. I feel life is more abundant in me. Physically, I feel better than I did 20 years ago. Actually, your body just, for a lot of us, it does just keep going. You do have your vitality. You're not falling apart. And if you exercise and eat well, you might find yourself in better health than you were when you were younger. That's what I'm finding. So I've got better health and more abundance. I feel I've got the most important part of my life still to go because I have a bit of experience behind me and perspective in which I value that creative force in me more. I believe in it, and it has to be central, and everything has to come after that, so to speak, or around that. It has to be arranged around that. That has to be in the middle, and I need to just get on with it. So there can be an urgency as you get older. You may have your most important things still left to do. Okay,